Good morning. Welcome to the technical stage. This is day one. Welcome to Apidays India in May of 2022, where we're looking to accelerate India's digitization with APIs. Kicking us off first is in our API architecture stage is Shylaja Sundararajan. Shylaja is a principal product manager at Harness, and Shylaja will be taking us through our topic, which is building effective API marketplace with Federation. Shailaja, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Wonderful.
you. Yeah.
All right, you're coming through nice and clear. So if I can have you kick things off, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Thanks, Akhil, for that quick introduction. I welcome everybody for the session, Building Effective Marketplace with Federation. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Shalaja. I'm currently working as a principal product manager in Harness. Prior to this, I have been working with SAP and I have a wealth of experience working with catalogs and marketplaces, and particularly in APIs. So, as part of today's session, I would be sharing my journey of how a API catalog was built, and particularly focusing on some key challenges with respect to discovery, and then talk about how was this challenge solved and what is the solution, and also share that solution, which is a key pattern that I would also share with all of you today, called the federation or the catalog segmentation pattern with federation, and finally run through with an example so that all of you could also appreciate and understand how this could be implemented in each of your marketplaces, right? So that's in a nutshell what I will be talking today. I will be spending the first 20 minutes running you through this agenda that I just talked about, and we leave the last 5 minutes for you to answer the questions. Please share the questions on the chat, and then we would pick it up at the end, right? Yeah, with that quick introduction, let me start and give you a brief summary of what is an API catalog and marketplace. I'm quite sure all of you are using a lot of marketplaces, but nevertheless, let's understand what is the catalog and the marketplace, right? So essentially, an API catalog is a collection of APIs exposed for our public consumers, and it's specifically focused on an organization or a company which has its different dimensions and different collaborations and networks based on how it shares these APIs. And definitely a catalog experience is needed for our consumers to easily get those APIs and understand it, right? Now, the next level is the marketplace. A catalog, and it provides a catalog experience, but a marketplace makes it a lot more easier to consume and also enable monetization over it, right? So let's say a consumer builds builds an app out of an API. How do we monetize? And so all such aspects comes out of the box with the marketplace. Now, let's look at the key three characteristics of any of these marketplaces or the catalog, vice versa, right? So, eventually, I will be using both these terms synonymously across, and it essentially refers to a marketplace is something with monetization, and a catalog is an inbuilt experience of the marketplace in itself, right? Now, coming back, what are the important characteristics that any of these marketplaces should offer, particularly in API marketplace, considering the digital transformation that we are all going through? Is an very easy discovery based on the needs. Example, let's say I have a business process that I have to implement. Let's say I have to implement an employee onboarding process. How quickly can I find these APIs, right? Or for an industry, that's something that's very, very important, and it is a need of the hour. And then understand the nuances of the API according to the industry standards, understanding the input structures, the input params, and how does the output come up, and so on. And finally, it just doesn't stop with understanding, but it has to transition into an implementation and get a key takeaway, right? So that's where the consumption comes in, where the APIs have to be seamlessly consumed in a test environment, and that's something that's very important that an API marketplace has to support. And that's something that I have learned in my experience, that just by discovering an API, the loop doesn't close and the key benefits are not yet there completely, right? So that's why the third dimension of a consumption comes in. And yeah, meaning now with this key characteristics that we have seen, let's also look at, right, some let's take some examples. Look at an API catalog with a directory of APIs, and let's start with an example of how is it evolved in its right. So just a moment. Okay, so as you see here, these are a couple of API catalogs, an API list. As you see here, it has a lot of APIs. And each of these APIs are being represented in the order of how it's been published by an API provider. To more appreciate, if you see, this is a very very plain vanilla catalog that we see, and we also know marketplaces have evolved over a period of time. Let's also talk about that in a bit of how it has evolved. But what you see here is the first kind of a flavor of a catalog, where all the APIs are being available based on when it has been published. Let's say it was published yesterday, there is an update, and all those are coming on top. But here, what we see is a simple collection. Likewise, the next step in the catalog evolution itself is that we did understand the consumers need some kind of categorization, and you see some categories being built on these marketplaces or catalogs, and then so that you could, me as a consumer or you as a consumer, could quickly go in and get one of these categories and further take it, right? So these are two flavors of catalogs. There are a lot available as well for different needs, but I have taken a couple of examples for you to appreciate what is a vanilla flavor catalog that we just saw, and with the next level of some categories based on any technical groupings or whatever, right? Now, I also wanted to talk about the API Setu catalog, which is our government supported catalog, where we see a lot of APIs with which we could get a lot of demographics and information that we could get, where our information is available across different dynamics. Let's say an insurance, or how do we manage our vehicles, and let's say from an education field and so on, right? So I would be also taking some examples here and running through. But to start with, what is this evolution of the catalog? This is the next evolution of the catalog, where you see some categories, right? Of course, these are all basic categories that we see for us to just navigate into and get in. Now, with this catalogs that you've just seen, let's also deep dive and get back. What is that? We talked about the key characteristics. To reiterate and appreciate and see what is the next evolution that's coming in and how can we achieve, right? So now that we saw, we have to discover APIs in the marketplace based on our need. That's one of the key characteristics. We talked about it in a bit back as well. Now, then I need to search and explore based on my need. I need to kind of look at different patterns of what has been available, different synonymous patterns, and then finally I should be able to consume, right? So with these are my three key requirements in a marketplace. Now let's deep dive onto the first aspect of how do I get into my need, right? So you would just ask me, hey, the catalogs that we just saw, is it not solving my need? Hey, is this solving your need, but not really kind of touching with your real need, right? So now let me give you an example of what is the need that I have as a persona of a product manager who wants to kind of build an application or an app, right? So my key requirement at this point in time is that I need to use the API Setu marketplace, right? And I take the persona of a citizen and a kind of a traffic inspector who wants to kind of look at a person's details and get to understand what all vehicles he have. Has he paid the real? He or she has paid the taxes. Is it all being registered, following the regular kind of guidelines and so on, right? That's my requirement. Now, when I come in here, of course, I don't see anything of my need matching here. But of course, if I search, then I get some APIs. I need to kind of deep dive onto these APIs and build it. Now, of course, this is one of the key problem statements that I want to highlight, saying, where is my discovery? My need is, this is my use case that I want to build, but my need is not yet kind of presented here well, right? So if it can be presented in that level, my discovery is faster and my time to build my application or go to market is also fairly reduced, right? So that's the discovery need that I'm talking about. Now we also saw this example. So as we walk through, I would also come back and say, how can this be improved with our solution that we are also going to talk about, right? So getting back, yes. Now, what are the challenges that we just saw about with that example? I navigated into the Setu marketplace. My need was to kind of build a vehicle holistic profile for a citizen with respect to all the vehicles and the compliances that he or she has to meet. So, based on my business needs or my use cases, my discovery is not very straightforward. It at present provides me a flat collection, and I cannot get APIs for an intent, right? And of course, I am also not able to understand what is the monetization aspects that I have to understand with respect to these APIs. So, taking these two key challenges, let's also see how do we work around these challenges, right? And and another dimension to add, or as part of all these challenges, is also that there are different personas who have different catalog needs, right? Let's also look at different personas. One is a sales expert. Let's say a sales expert comes to a catalog to understand, and he's kind of trying to solve a customer problem, and he wants to exactly nail down with that customer discovery, come and look into the catalog and try to quickly curate some APIs and build it. That's not something that is available. We also saw that example with that API Setu catalog with the vehicle um, scenario. And same comes with an enterprise architect, right? An enterprise architect needs a collection which is all pertaining to a business need, but also needs to kind of understand the technical groupings. And let's say if I have to understand if it's all an OData API or a REST API, what does it support, and a lot more authentication, group by authentication, and so on. So that enterprise architect's needs are different, and there has to be a grouping for that as well, right? So me as an enterprise architect would want to kind of consider those aspects and have a collection. That's also something that's a different need. And finally, coming to a developer, the developer's needs are a lot more fine grained in terms of understanding the API nuances itself. So as you see here, there are three different personas, three different needs, and we need to make sure we cater to all these different personas who comes in, and present them with the appropriate information so that we could also get them to achieve what they want, right? So in my experience of building catalogs, catering to all these personas in a catalog marketplace is very, very, very important. And let's see how do we achieve this as well, right? So with that, we talked about, to quickly summarize, we talked about what's the marketplace, what is the challenges that we saw. And yeah, the challenge was to kind of get a collection of API based on a business intent or a use case or a persona intent and so on, right? So let's now look at what happens if we have to solve this problem, right? Normally what goes on in a second evolution catalog that we saw with some categories, if I have to cater to all these personas that we just saw, what goes behind in a catalog, right? Now, the first one is a very simple catalog that we saw, which was a vanilla collection updated based on the timestamp. So it simply needs an ordering of the APIs based on the timestamp, nothing more, but an exhaustive search has to be supported. This is, of course, from a catalog perspective, right? Now, the next step in terms of building a groups and categories, we all now are very clear that it's inevitable that we have some categories, and to make sure that reaches our users well. Now, to build these categories, what goes behind is that normally what happens is a lot of manual curation happens, and we try to support and have an infrastructure and present it on the marketplace by manually curating as and when some new APIs are being published. There is a kind of a clear categorization and segmentation that happens manually, and that kind of brings in a lot of overhead as well, right? To build a very simple category, there has to be a dedicated persona who does that and starts understanding as and when on a regular basis, as and when APIs comes into a catalog, this grouping has to be done. Else it so happens that your collections becomes stale and it will not get updated, right? So this is an overhead that comes in when you have built in categories. Of course, there could be some more automations to still kind of work around this. But yeah, there is definitely a dedicated activity. Even with an automation, there has to be a dedicated activity that needs to be done, and that brings in an overhead, right? And of course, with the third evolution that we are all in, we need to kind of get into more of APIs with the intent. So that's what we are trying to reach towards, and that's what is a solution that I would like to now share with all of you, and also solve the problems with the catalog, the second generation catalog as well, right? Yeah. So now, how can these challenges be overcome is about having a catalog segmentation auto curation pattern in a marketplace. Now, this is something that happens at the back of a catalog, and it does an auto curation and segments the catalog and presents it in a different way, right? This is the solution that I would want to run through with all of you and see. I mean, that's the third generation that we are towards, and that will try to spearhead our consumption of APIs and improve the marketplaces overall. Now, how can we build this effective marketplace with a segmentation pattern? We need to segment the APIs based on some semantics. And in our scenario at this point in time, we are in a need of to identify, cater the needs of a persona and also solve the intent for that persona, right? Now, the key semantics that you see here that we need to consider and segment the entire marketplace is based on these attributes of the persona who's using that, and what is the need and what is the output of this entire business case or a scenario that is needed. And how can this be done? It's like an auto building of the segmented collections based on the metadata available in the APIs. Now, the word metadata sounds a little technical. To complement it, let's also use the attributes that comes out of the box with the APIs. There could be a case that now we need to also start consciously collecting some attributes of these APIs with which we can start segmenting the entire catalog and group it, right? Um, yeah, I mean, I hope this kind of rings a bell at this point in time. To kind of group it into a real world scenario, it's nothing but just grouping. But here we have to be very clear that we are grouping and based on some key attributes of the API and start collecting these attributes, right? So there are some marketplaces which are collecting already these attributes. There are some marketplaces which might not. It start needs to collect these attributes and then start segmenting. And this entire pattern is all about auto building and auto curating, and let's see how does this happen as well, right? Now, there are some semantics that I have presented. Let's say to complement the persona, the need, and the output, we could capture what is the business case that we are building, the processes that are around this particular API, what industry does it belong to, what product does it belong to, country, and so on, right? The amount of attributes that we can collect is endless, and these are some of the semantics that are mandatory for us to do this segmentation pattern as well. So yeah, so let's assume at this point in time we have the API say to catalog with these information that we have captured, and with this information that we have captured, what would we do? We will identify the business dynamics and say, hey, this is the business dynamics that I want to segment it, and then leave it to the auto curator to auto group and then present these different segments, right? So the process works this way. There's an auto curation of all these collection of APIs or segments that we would want to build. We present the business intent, then a virtual collection is available and then goes into public availability in the catalog. Now, this looks kind of very straightforward, but yeah, what is that which really goes behind the scenes? What are the personas who are involved and how do they really achieve that? A publisher comes in and adds some APIs or into the catalog with the metadata, right? And we say, hey, these are some of the metadata that you have to present, and start collecting this information. And then the auto semantic collector comes in. Based on the intent that is available, it starts grouping, or based on all the attributes that is available, a number of collections or segments could be built by the auto semantic collector. And then there is an administrator available with the catalog who's being presented with all these virtual collections that have been built. And then based on the administrator's discretion, they could check in and understand, hey, these are all relevant for the publisher and for the publisher's need. And then the administrator notifies back to the publisher to say, hey, these are something that we have built. Do you also want this to be presented as part of a catalog to check the functional correctness and whatnot? And then it goes live into the public catalog, right? So what is happening here is that with a very simple metadata or an attribute information of a particular API, and by collecting these, we are able to segment and present it back, right? And that kind of reaches our need very closely, saying, hey, this is my business intent and this is how I can quickly go in. And let's say somebody searches on the catalog marketplace as well, they will get these segments, quickly reach the segment, and then take that API collection and implement it. Just to get you all appreciate how does this look like, right, from the API and the metadata as well. There could be different APIs referring to different metadata objects. Just to give you an example, an API metadata can have an intent, the persona who is you going to use it, and what would they use it, or what is the end user persona who will benefit with it, what is the industry and the output, right? Now, in our example that we talked about, let's say all the vehicle insurance APIs that we saw, the two-wheeler insurance APIs, the four-wheeler insurances, the tax APIs, and so on, needs to have these metadata. Then what happens is, let's say I will say, hey, group by the vehicle insurance as my business intent. Then all these APIs gets grouped into one and gets associated to a particular metadata attribute or a metadata object in itself, right? So now once that is being built that way, what you would see is a varied set of collections that could get built, and we kind of present all these segments and keeps the entire catalog dynamic and benefit the end user as well, right? Now, what are the advantages of building such a catalog pattern? Is that now that you would have, meaning now that it's clear, it is no longer a vanilla collection, the first flavor, and it's no longer just having some categories and having a difficulty scaling the categories. A very rich catalog is being built, and the business growth is also enabled by having newer segments of collections. And finally, meaning it's very very easily accessible for our personas, and with this a lot of content federation also happens. So there are different, it could happen that your API catalog is also hosting some different types of APIs, then there's a lot of federation of content happens and being presented based on the business need, right? Yeah. So we talked about the vehicle example. Just to reiterate, what happens is, let's say on an add-on of a vehicle insurance collection, I've done the segmentation pattern. I would get an API catalog with different industries saying insurance, banking, and so on. And then when I go to an insurance, this is for more for an insurance persona, right? And goes into the insurance, looks at the vehicle insurance, and gets to see all the insurance APIs together. Or if it is another citizen persona, then the citizen persona comes in and looks at all these for a particular, for him or her, he or she is able to get into all these collection, and then they take this entire collection into a test environment for consumption. um, so even though the persona who's going to consume is more of a developer or an app builder, but then we are going to benefit a citizen or a vehicle insurance provider who's able to get all these information on the go, right? So this is how a segmentation pattern clearly makes the marketplace dynamic, stands out, easily consumable. And of course, you could also segment it based on the monetization aspects, and the monetization information for this entire collection could also be presented and taken on to the next step, right? I Okay. With that, I think I'm on time, and we could open for questions.
Fabulous. Thanks, Shailaja. That was bang on time. We do have one question that came through in the chat. I'm
Mhm.
just going to read it out to you. But basically, is there any way to automatically sync changes slash versions
Mm.
in the API marketplace when a tech team builds a new API?
So, is there any automatic way of syncing the versions of?
So I think the question relates to, when you were showing about segmentation. So
Mm.
the idea then being, okay, if a tech team, if one of the team builds a new API, right, or they develop a new version, like a
Mm.
major version increment, how does that really work, right? So would you replace something, like is the categorization and segmentation smart enough to figure that out?
Okay. So it also depends on how this entire catalog is being built for versions. There are again two scenarios, right? It could be it could be that you only maintain the latest versions of those APIs. Of course, in a cloud scenario, that's what is needed. But you would, in that case, the collections would just take the newer version of the APIs. And the other way to do is that if you have maintained all the versions, then we could still, the collection and the segmentation would still kind of build all the or associate all the versions that has been available so far in the catalog, right? So it at the end it depends also on the provider perspective of how do we want to provide it, but that's something that can be done with the segmentation.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you very much. Digesh, hopefully that answered your question, but if not, feel free to pop that in the chat. And Shailaja, thank you very much. Fascinating topic. I love the idea of intentional APIs. So thank you for kicking us off on this technical track.
Okay. So, Akhil, I just wanted to quickly share my coordinates, just in case if any of you want to reach out to me. I'm reachable in this LinkedIn profile, and my email ID is this. Feel free to post any questions, and we could have an offline chat as well.
Yeah. Shailaja, my suggestion is, and for other speakers as well, just pop it in the chat. That way it's persistent, because after you leave, if someone forgets, they can just copy paste from the chat.
Sure, I can do that.
All right. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of the conference and rest of the day.